May 10th, 1940. An extraordinary coincidence. The same day that Hitler launches his lightning war on Western Europe, Churchill is named Prime Minister of Great Britain. As if fate had a hand in the decision. A few weeks later, Hitler conquers France, Holland, and Belgium. Churchill finds himself isolated, facing an army that has already vanquished a large portion of Europe. Churchill refuses to surrender.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall never surrender.
Sie können uns unterdrücken. Sie können uns meinetwegen töten. Kapitulieren werden wir nicht.
Between 1940 and 1945, Hitler and Churchill devoted every minute of their existence to the other's destruction. These two diametrically opposed personalities will do battle, and both promise their people victory. The combat these titans wrought determined the course of human destiny. Beneath the clamor of bombs, a river of blood and bodies, these larger-than-life leaders seemed to fuse with their nations. Their duel, undoubtedly the most important of the modern era, pits two possible worlds against one another. How did they get here? How did destiny bring two men so different, and yet at times so alike, together for this ultimate confrontation? The first showdown between these two 20th century giants took place well before 1940. It's 1916, and the First World War drags on. At this point, more than 2 million soldiers are already dead. World War I proves an unspeakable massacre. From the sodden trenches of the Artois region of France, a British officer writes to his wife,
"Filth and rubbish everywhere. Graves built into the defenses and scattered about promiscuously. Feet and clothing breaking through the soil. The unceasing accompaniment of rifle and machine guns, and the venomous whining and whirring of the bullets which pass overhead. Amid these surroundings, aided by wet and cold, and every minor discomfort, I have found happiness and content such as I have not known for many months."
The author of these lines, who seems to relish the cold under the hail of bullets, is Winston Churchill. And if he seems as comfortable in the trenches as in his bath, it's because his youth was already a veritable adventure novel. Winston is born in one of England's most beautiful palaces in 1874. American by his mother and English aristocracy by his father, the boy has never spread toothpaste on his own toothbrush. Educated in boarding school, he is a restless student with poor grades. His father considers him a dullard. Quickly reoriented to a military career, the young man surprises everyone. He distinguishes himself as a soldier in 3 colonial wars on the outskirts of the empire, in India, Sudan, and South Africa. Back in England, the intrepid hussar enters Parliament and holds a series of government posts. At age 36, he's already Home Secretary. Graced with insatiable ambition and astonishing eloquence, the following year he is named First Lord of the Admiralty, which becomes one of the world's most prestigious posts when World War I breaks out. But his ascension is abruptly interrupted, because in 1915 he commits an unforgivable act. He torpedoes his political career with a bungled occupation during the Gallipoli campaign in Turkey, a mission intended to attack German forces from the rear. more than 100,000 soldiers from the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and France die in the course of this disastrous campaign. Churchill is forced to resign. He enters a difficult depressive phase, which he calls his black dog. At 42 years old, he's considered a finished man. But Churchill abhors idleness. So the former First Lord of the Admiralty and Home Secretary decides to join the French front lines. He's transferred to a Scots battalion that is fighting in Flanders. Churchill loves combat, and the roar of the cannons helps keep at bay his two most notorious enemies, inactivity and depression. In the long hours between attacks, Churchill drinks whiskey, writes, takes baths, and very near the front line gives in to all-consuming passion, painting. Just a few kilometers away, on the other side of the trenches, a young corporal in the Bavarian infantry is passionate about painting as well and sketches tirelessly. A volunteer in the German army, Adolf Hitler is 27 years old, 15 years younger than Churchill. For many years, he has wanted to become a professional artist. In the foxholes of Flanders, he's a dispatch rider, carrying messages from one position to another under barrage and artillery fire. After almost 2 years of war, the young soldier, well noted, diligent, and serious, is already radically re-evaluating his life. The routine of military life suits him perfectly. It's his first war, and he's convinced he's found his place at last. Indeed, there were many years of aimless wandering for the young Austrian. Born in a lower middle-class household to an extremely violent father and an overprotective mother, Hitler had a very troubled childhood. Given his poor academic results, his father envisions a career as a public servant for his son, but the young man wants to be a painter. At 18, he leaves home and moves to Vienna. Hitler fails the entrance exam to the Academy of Fine Arts twice. The misunderstood artist makes little effort to earn a living. He barely gets by selling his works, which acquaintances say are painted in an unhurried rhythm. For a time, he's even forced to stay at a homeless shelter and lives in poverty. On August 2nd, 1914, a divine surprise. War is declared. Hitler, in Munich, is euphoric. I'm not ashamed to say that, overcome by a storm of enthusiasm, I fell on my knees and thanked heaven from an overflowing heart, he later writes. The conflict jolts the failed painter from his torpor. Thus, as early as World War I, Corporal Hitler and Lieutenant Colonel Churchill are in direct opposition. Everything separates them, their background, their nationality. But down in the trenches, the two soldiers resemble one another. The smell of gunpowder and paint are like a fountain of youth to them. Here, Hitler forgets his parents who died prematurely and his repeated failures in art school. Churchill pushes aside the shame that dogged him after Gallipoli, and perhaps forgets his father, who always belittled him as well. The two intrepid soldiers distinguish themselves on the battlefield. Hitler is decorated with an Iron Cross, First Class, a distinction he'll display his entire life. After 6 months in the mud, Churchill's depression lifts and he's feeling much better. The deputy returns to London. 15 months later, he joins the government as Minister of Munitions. The two men don't yet know one another, but in the eye of the steel storm that pummels Northern Europe, Their duel has already begun. The bullets that Adolf Hitler dodges were manufactured by the Minister of Munitions, Winston Churchill. Hitler is wounded several times. In October 1918, the corporal is the victim of a mustard gas attack and evacuated to a hospital behind the front lines. For him, the war is over. One month later, the armistice is signed. Germany has lost. The victory is celebrated around the world. In Britain, Churchill regains his post and his rank. The Minister of Munitions has accomplished several feats. Curious and passionate, he oversaw the production of munitions as well as armored tanks, whose use he encouraged, and which were decisive in a number of battles. Many in England credit him with the victory, and during the parade, he is well positioned. While Churchill is in the light, Hitler is in darkness. Temporarily blinded, Germany's surrender is a humiliating blow for the young corporal. The peace imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, nicknamed the Versailles Diktat, disgusts him. Germany is partially occupied and sometimes even plundered by the victors. Part of the country is amputated. Enormous war reparations must be paid, and its battleships are dismembered with blowtorches. For Hitler, it's a stab in the back to a prestigious nation. No longer sure what to do with his life, Corporal Hitler joins the German Workers' Party, an extreme right-wing group that's one of a dozen that exist at the time. The first time he speaks in public, the audience is riveted. At this precise moment, I understood that I knew how to speak, he writes later. Thanks to his eloquence, he quickly becomes the party's speaker of choice. Hitler, the failed artist, the lazy student, the wounded soldier, now knows he's good at something. He's propelled to the head of the movement, which he renames the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party for short. And he's certain of his mission: seize power. The war has lifted Churchill out of his depression and gotten Hitler off the streets. Both men are brimming with ambition. Hitler wants to restore Germany's image. Churchill wants to restore his family's reputation because of his father's failed ministerial career and the fact that he died ostracized from his party. The two orators begin a new chapter in their lives. In post-war Germany, economic scarcity and revolutionary stirrings collide. Hitler becomes the talk of the town. He leads sympathizers in a putsch in Munich. The attempted coup is a resounding failure. 14 Nazi militants are killed. A trial takes place a few weeks later. Hitler turns the courtroom into a veritable tribunal. The accused states, "I have not come to deny anything. The responsibility for this putsch is mine and mine alone." The orator wins the audience's sympathy. He is sentenced to only 5 years in prison with a promise of conditional early release. His determination before the judges makes him famous throughout Germany. In his spacious prison cell in Landsberg, Hitler writes a book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, in which he lays out his racist and anti-democratic ideology. After barely 9 months of incarceration, he's out. Hitler has managed to enhance his aura. Prison should have silenced him. Instead, it placed him at the head of the party and offered him a springboard. The no-name Austrian painter has entered into history. He's become the Führer, the guide. The failure of the putsch convinced him that power can only be seized by a ballot box. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, it's also thanks to his talent as a speaker that Churchill rises from post to post in the ministries of war, aviation, and the colonies. The minister puts his finger in many pies: armaments, secret service, cracking codes. The talented public servant is also attentive to his family and life in society. Married to Clementine Hosier, father of 4, he receives guests at Chartwell, a manor house where he plays the gentleman farmer. An ambitious parliament member, he is up on current events and knows how to put himself in the spotlight. When appendicitis stops him from campaigning, he arrives at the polling station in a chair. Churchill's career is bright. At 50, he is named Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Minister of Finance. Thus, by the middle of the 1920s, 2 former soldiers, painters, writers, and orators are back in the saddle. But they are worlds apart from one another. If the Englishman suggests, the German bellows. If the petit bourgeois sweats as he pushes back a lock of hair, the aristocrat is not above antics that play to the gallery. Churchill is a world-class drinker, always tipsy perhaps, but never drunk. Hitler detests alcohol and wonders how anyone can drink champagne, which he calls nothing but vulgar vinegar. Churchill is often accompanied by his wife, Clementine. Hitler plays it chaste and claims that his only spouse is Germany. The patriotic Churchill has humor and wit. He holds court for hours in the Chamber of Deputies because his colleagues fear getting a taste of his deadly eloquence if they challenge him. Like the day when Deputy Lady Astor said to him, "Mr. Churchill, if I were your wife, I'd poison your coffee." To which Churchill retorted, "Madam, if I were your husband, I'd drink it." The nationalist Hitler never debates because no one dares contradict him. He delivers long monologues that can last for hours. But his speeches fascinate the crowds and resemble mass religious conversions. The more he speaks, the more the faithful flock to him. His speaking skills are magnified by his ability to cast a hypnotic spell over his listeners. But the skills these 2 theatrical giants display are also the fruit of tireless practice. The nervous man from Munich tries out new poses, expressions, and gestures, perfecting them to better communicate with the people he wants to influence. The extravagant Englishman prepares his improvised discourses for hours on end. By the end of the 1920s, the 2 men are now important figures in their respective countries. But an event will change their destiny. In October 1929, panic breaks out on Wall Street. The stock market crashes. Soon the world's economy is plunged into a recession. In England, the Conservative government is swept aside. Winston loses his post as Minister of Finance. Every political faction attacks him for his disastrous mismanaging of the Treasury. The straight shooter becomes a pariah. No one trusts him. He confides, "They said I was the worst Chancellor of the Exchequer that England ever had, and they were right." While Churchill hits bottom, Hitler is a rising star. Fed by the crisis, the firebrand has transformed an insignificant group into an increasingly powerful machine.
Ich habe
Hitler understands the frustrations of the German people and knows the humiliation of defeat better than anyone. The strength of his convictions rallies his countrymen around him.
Glaube niemals an fremde Hilfe, niemals an Hilfe, die außerhalb unserer eigenen Nation, unseres eigenen Volkes liegt. In uns selbst allein liegt die Zukunft des deutschen Volkes. Wenn wir selbst dieses deutsche Volk emporführen durch eigene Arbeit, durch eigenen Fleiß, eigene Entschlossenheit, eigenen Trotz, eigene Beharrlichkeit, dann werden wir wieder emporsteigen, genau wie die Väter einst aus Deutschland nicht geschenkt erhielten, sondern selbst nicht schaffen mussten.
His hoarse and penetrating voice elicits emotion and instinctively unleashes passions.
Deutschland heil!
His political movement transforms into a wave that sweeps across the whole of society. So much so that in January 1933, the little corporal is named Chancellor of Germany by President Hindenburg. 9 years after his failed putsch, the insurgent has succeeded in rising to the very top. Hitler sees the purpose of democracy as a means to seize power, and more importantly, not to lose it. Once in office, he bans every faction that could hurt him. Unions and opposition parties are dissolved and outlawed. Jews are persecuted. Hitler drives Germany into darkness. A recluse at his manor in Chartwell, Churchill is completely isolated. He may be alone, but he has no intention of watching from the sidelines, because he is one of the few people to have read Mein Kampf. As early as 1934, he alerts the public to the danger Nazi Germany represents.
Only a few hours away by air, there dwells a nation of nearly 70 million, of the most educated, industrious, scientific, disciplined people in the world, who are being taught from childhood to think of war as a glorious exercise, and death in battle as the noblest fate for man. There is a nation which, with all its strength and virtue, is in the grip of a group of ruthless men preaching a gospel of intolerance and racial pride, unrestrained by law, by parliament, or by public opinion. From their new table of commandments, they have omitted, "Thou shalt not kill." Now they are rearmed with the utmost speed. And in face of these facts, I ask again, what are we to do?
A long-distance duel begins between the aristocrat and the petit bourgeois, a duel largely dominated by the dictator. Flouting the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler prepares his people's revenge for 1918. He reinstates obligatory military service and launches a rearmament policy. In 1936, he remilitarizes the Rhineland, the buffer zone at the French-German border, by pretending he has a powerful army, when in fact he has only 2 divisions. But the bluff works. Neither France nor England raise a finger. In March 1938, he activates Anschluss, the annexing of Austria into the German Reich. Nazi marketing still hums along, and the annexation resembles a regional celebration. Within 48 hours, Austria ceases to exist. Once more, European democracies so fear war that they remain silent. Winston again denounces the forceful takeovers, but his press department is less powerful than that of the Reich. To fill the long days, the occasionally depressed recluse oversees the construction of a swimming pool on his property. He takes great interest in the mason work and even becomes a member of the Masons' Federation. The greatest irony is that influential members of his society now reject Churchill while embracing Hitler. Lloyd George, former British Prime Minister, signatory of the Treaty of Versailles and Churchill's former brother-in-arms, visits him in Berghof. As does Edward VIII, the Duke of Windsor, ex-King of England, with whom Churchill was close. The former sovereign seems to support the Nazi dictator's political views, in part because Hitler has stepped up lobbying to neutralize warmongers in the opposition camp. His supporters even operate on British soil. In the heart of London, British Nazis often take part in parades, passing themselves off as pacifist militants. They display "Stop War" protest signs, which the Reich is preparing for war, but don't make war with the Reich. In 1937, the bluffing Berliner will even attempt to influence Churchill himself. He sends his ambassador Ribbentrop to London to sound out the old deputy who has denounced them for so many years. Ribbentrop explains to Churchill that Germany needs breathing room to the east, and even guarantees that Germany will defend the British Empire. But Churchill immediately refuses. England will never accept a colonial enterprise to the east. Ribbentrop abruptly turns away and says, "In that case, war is inevitable. There is no way out. The Fuhrer is resolved. Nothing will stop him." "Do not underrate England," exclaims Churchill. "She is very clever. If you plunge us all into another great war, she will bring the whole world against you, like last time." But neither Hitler nor Ribbentrop worries about the threats of a 63-year-old deputy. In the eyes of Britain and Hitler, he's finished. Nevertheless, Churchill relentlessly condemns the policy of appeasement and the wrong-headed pacifism of the British political class. Ostracized by Parliament, he continues to believe in his lucky star and comes off like a lunatic when he claims, "History will prove you wrong in this matter, and if I am so sure, it's because I will write it myself." For now, it's Hitler who is dictating history. No more bluffing. The Wehrmacht has become a powerful war machine, and no one can curb the Führer's appetite. After the Rhineland and Austria, Hitler demands in no uncertain terms possession of the Sudets region of Czechoslovakia, where 3 million Germans live. He announces point blank to the Czech president Edvard Beneš that he's willing to go to war for it.
Und hinter mir, das macht die weltliche marschiert jetzt ein Volk, und zwar ein anderes als das vom Jahr 1908. Und doch bitte ich alle Herrn Beneš ein Angebot gemacht. Er hat jetzt in seiner Hand Frieden oder Krieg. Er wird entweder dieses Angebot jetzt akzeptieren und den Deutschen endlich die Freiheit geben, oder wir werden diese Freiheit jetzt holen.
Hitler has become a master of the art of frightening declarations. Terrified by the power of the Wehrmacht, horrified at the idea of a new Paris and London, both allies of Czechoslovakia, nevertheless signed the Munich Pact, which bestows the Sudets region to Hitler in exchange for a mere scrap of paper. The English see Britain's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain as a hero who has preserved peace.
when we shout, God bless you, Mr. Chamberlain. Our hats go up to you. Come everybody, God bless you.
Away from the spotlight, Churchill doesn't applaud. He prophesizes,
You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war.
Less than 6 months later, Hitler violates the Munich Pact. In March 1939, his army invades what remains of Czechoslovakia and triumphantly enters Prague. Contemplating the city from the fortified castle of the kings of Bohemia, Hitler savors his victory. A camp aide informs him that neither France nor England have moved their armies. He replies, I knew it. In 2 weeks, no one will speak of it again. Since taking power, the German eagle hasn't made one false move. He succeeded in taking over Rhineland, Austria, and Czechoslovakia without firing a single shot. If history had stopped there, despite the persecution of his opponents, Hitler would have been considered a great German statesman. In 6 years, he stopped inflation, fought unemployment, gave Germans back their pride, and made Germany the most powerful European nation. And if history had stopped there, Churchill, the aristocrat, would have been considered a politician with an outstanding oratory talent, but an overly impulsive and depressed man who had ruined his career like his father before him. But history has more surprises in store. By invading Czechoslovakia, Hitler proved the Eastern nation was powerless. Progressively, public opinion swings in the other direction. The English now understand that Churchill was right all those years about Germany's intentions. The newspapers announce, we still need Churchill. A few months later, on September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland. France and England finally enter the war. Prime Minister Chamberlain has no choice but to bend to public opinion. Churchill, the failed politician, is immediately called back to serve his government. 25 years after his humiliating ousting following the Gallipoli disaster, Churchill is once again named First Lord of the Admiralty. The ministers curse their pesky colleague. But Winston has become untouchable. He's the only real warrior in the government, because Chamberlain has proved a catastrophe as a wartime prime minister. The consequences are swift.
Goodbye, Mr. Chamberlain, and thanks for all you've tried to do. We welcome the new Prime Minister, Mr. Churchill.
May 10th, 1940, the same day that Churchill is named Prime Minister, Hitler attacks Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. 20 years after the First World War, the two men now find themselves face to face, each at the head of their own nation. Who thought he had seen the last of his main rival has in fact put him back in power. After a decade of observing one another, the two men will finally do battle. Excluded from political life for more than 10 years, Churchill has been dreaming of this moment, and it's understandable. This is the challenge that could restore his reputation. At 65 years of age, the old British bulldog senses he was made for this moment. Since starting at the ministry, this warrior has overseen the development of the weapons and inventions necessary to defending the empire. Armored tanks, the Royal Air Force, the Secret Services, radar technology, and the ships of the Royal Navy. Each of these units owe their modernization and even their very existence to Churchill. But the Prime Minister's most powerful weapon is his extraordinary eloquence. Hitler has indoctrinated his people for almost 7 years. Churchill has only a few days to find the words that will give his people the courage to resist against all odds.
I would say to the House, as I said to those who have joined the government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might, and with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word, victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
Hearing him speak, even members of the opposition are in tears. The people of England, like the French of the same era, are caught between fear, defeatism, and the instinct to survive. The underlying courage was there, but it had to be awakened, and that's what Churchill did. Still, on that night, the new Prime Minister had doubts. He is cheered by the crowd, which shouts, "Good luck, Winnie. God bless you." But once he's alone, Churchill breaks down in tears and confides to his generals. Poor people. They trust me, and I can give them nothing but disaster for quite a long time. Disasters? They crop up even sooner than expected. Hitler has developed the lightning war, a highly effective warfare technique. Thousands of Wehrmacht tanks, supported by the Air Force, penetrate France and wreak havoc. In just a few hours, the chain of command is broken. On May 20th, after only 10 days of fighting, the German troops reach the English Channel. More than 500,000 British and French soldiers find themselves trapped in the pocket of Dunkirk. Their backs to the sea, they are under German fire. Hitler destroys or captures a large part of the Allied army. In light of the defeat, some British ministers want to negotiate with Hitler. But Churchill won't bend. Better to die fighting. But before dying, the army must be rescued. Churchill launches Operation Dynamo. Its mission, the evacuation of Dunkirk. On May 26th, more than 220 warships and more than 660 civilian boats, supported by the RAF, come to the aid of the Allied divisions. Under heavy fire from the Luftwaffe, British strategists hope to bring home at least 50,000 of the 500,000 soldiers stationed on the beaches. Despite the shelling that rips through the naval vessels, in 10 days, more than 335,000 soldiers are evacuated and brought home safe and sound to England. Churchill deems Operation Dynamo a miracle because it literally saved the British Army. This heroic evacuation considerably enhanced his standing. Newsreels commend the mission's success.
Out from the hell that is Dunkirk, back from the steel thrust of the German war machine comes the BEF. They're worn out and footsore. They're hungry. For weeks they have been shelled and bombed from 3 sides. They had to stagger back to the sea to survive. They were betrayed, but never defeated or dispirited. Round these men there hangs an atmosphere of glory. While these men live and breathe, Britain is safe. The enemy will never pass.
But the headlines neglect to mention that the Allies have left their equipment behind, their cannons, their tanks, and even their dead. Churchill is a realist. He states, "We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations." Hitler is delighted. He's won the Battle of France in record time. His generals never imagined getting so far so quickly. Revenge for 1918 has been served. The vanquished of yesterday are today's victors. Hitler is definitely a god of war. With France defeated, Churchill is more alone than ever. But the old bulldog won't be waiting quietly for the invasion. The United Kingdom is turned into a fortress. And to secure its seas, the Prime Minister launches an operation that will capture everyone's imagination. July 3rd, 1940, Winston makes the difficult decision to bomb the French fleet based at Mers El Kabir near Oran. Because of the armistice signed by the French, its ships could fall into Hitler's hands and take part in an invasion of England. 1,297 French sailors are killed in the offensive. 1 month earlier, these soldiers fought side by side with the British. This was a hateful decision, the most unnatural and painful in which I have ever been concerned, confides Churchill. The attack is bloody, but it proves to the world the Prime Minister's tenacity. Faced with the bulldog's determination, the eagle resorts to trickery. Do the British really want war? Hitler hopes to convince them to oust Churchill and sign an armistice on the French model that would avoid a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. There is no shortage of Englishmen eager to negotiate. Lloyd George, or even the Duke of Windsor, could take control of the empire. July 19th, Hitler himself makes an appeal for peace to the treacherous Albion.
In dieser Stunde fühle ich mich verpflichtet, vor meinem Gericht noch einmal einen Appell an die Vernunft auch in England zu richten. Ich glaube, dies tun zu können, weil ich ja nicht als besiegt um etwas bitte, sondern als Sieger nur für die Vernunft spreche. Ich sehe keinen Grund, der zur Fortführung dieses Kampfes bringen könnte.
But in unison with the people of England, Churchill rejects the olive branch extended on the tip of a cutlass, and newsreels mock the Führer.
There are various uses to which Hitler's leaflets may be put. For example, shaving paper.
The Germans are dumbfounded. Can you believe these English imbeciles? Now they are rejecting peace? They're crazy, is heard in the streets of Berlin. Hitler thought he could triumph over Britain without a fight. He's forced to revise his strategy because there's a stone in his path. A stone named Churchill. A confrontation is inevitable. The Battle of Britain begins.
Nella grande metropoli di un'isola lontana che si allunga sul mare come un grosso ragno dagli immani tentacoli, c'era un sinistro castello, dimora di ombre e di fantasmi, popolato dai più ripugnanti animali notturni, che aveva dell'uomo e del mostro. Lì dentro, ogni qualvolta egli voleva presentarsi agli esseri umani, si preparava una certa bevanda, miscuglio dei più allettanti ma pericolosi ingredienti, che gli permettevano di trasformarsi miracolosamente.